The single father thought he was being sent to Dubai because his company finally trusted him with an important assignment. He packed one suitcase, kissed his 8-year-old daughter goodbye, and promised her he would be home before she knew it. But when he stepped into the glass-walled conference room of the world's most powerful investor, a billionaire stared at him for several seconds and asked a question that made the entire room go silent. "Does your CEO know who you really are?" The father slowly looked up. For the first time in 15 years, the secret he had buried beneath ordinary clothes, unpaid bills, school lunches, and fatherhood was about to come back to him. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that someone's current circumstances don't define their worth, please like this video, comment, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Dad's Soul Diaries. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories about ordinary people whose hidden courage changes everything. The man at the center of the story was Nolan Pierce, a 39-year-old single father who worked as a senior logistics coordinator for a rapidly growing American technology company called Meridian Atlas. Nolan wasn't the kind of employee who attracted attention. He arrived early, stayed late, and never complained when other people received credit for work he had quietly completed. His clothes were neat but inexpensive, his shoes had been repaired twice, and the small silver watch on his wrist had belonged to his father. Every morning, before going to work, Nolan prepared breakfast for his 8-year-old daughter, Maisie, checked her backpack, tied her shoelaces when she was in a hurry, and reminded her that being kind was more important than being impressive. Since becoming a single father, his life had become a careful balance of deadlines, grocery bills, school projects, and trying to make sure his daughter never felt the absence of her mother as an absence of love. Nolan had once lived a completely different life, but nobody at Meridian Atlas knew about it. He had deliberately buried that chapter because he had grown tired of being defined by it. Years earlier, Nolan had been a brilliant international operations specialist who had helped rescue failing companies from financial disaster. He understood supply chains, international negotiations, crisis management, and complex logistics better than almost anyone his age. He had once been offered executive positions, but after his daughter was born, he stepped away from that world. He wanted to be present. He wanted to be the father who attended school plays instead of missing them because of another flight. He wanted to be there when Maisie lost her first tooth, when she got sick, and when she woke from nightmares. Money had become less important than time. Then his wife had died unexpectedly. Nolan's priorities changed completely. He accepted a modest position at Meridian Atlas and started over. For years, he had kept his head down. That changed when the company's CEO, Vivian Rourke, announced that Meridian Atlas had been invited to negotiate a potentially enormous international partnership in Dubai. The contract could transform the company. But the executive team needed someone who understood the complicated logistics behind the deal. Vivian chose Nolan. Not because she respected him. Because she believed he was expendable. The company had been struggling internally, and Nolan had recently uncovered a serious error in a senior executive's financial projections. Instead of being thanked, he became inconvenient. Sending him overseas allowed Vivian to remove him from headquarters while making him responsible if the negotiations failed. Nolan knew something was wrong. But he accepted anyway. He needed the promotion. He needed the money. Most importantly, he wanted to secure Maisie's future. Before leaving, he sat beside his daughter on their small apartment balcony while the afternoon sun filled the sky. He promised her he would return quickly. Maisie handed him a tiny handmade paper star. She told him to keep it in his suitcase so he wouldn't forget her. Nolan smiled and placed it carefully inside the front pocket. The next morning, he flew to Dubai. When Nolan arrived, the city looked like something from another world. Glass towers reflected the bright afternoon sun. Luxury vehicles moved along spotless roads, and massive buildings seemed to rise directly from the desert. Yet Nolan wasn't interested in sightseeing. He had one mission: finish the negotiations and return home. The meeting was scheduled inside one of Dubai's most exclusive business towers. Nolan entered wearing a simple charcoal suit. He expected to meet the representatives of the investment group. Instead, he walked into a room filled with senior executives. At the center sat Darius Olcott, a billionaire investor whose business empire stretched across shipping, technology, construction, and renewable energy. Darius was known for being difficult to impress. He rarely attended preliminary meetings. But that afternoon, he had come personally. Nolan began presenting the logistics proposal. For 20 minutes, nobody interrupted. Then Darius leaned back. He studied Nolan. He looked at the way Nolan organized the numbers, the way he anticipated problems before they were raised, and the way he calmly explained several weaknesses in Meridian Atlas's original plan. Something about him seemed familiar. Darius asked where Nolan had learned international crisis logistics. Nolan simply said he had experience. Darius asked where. Nolan gave another vague answer. The billionaire became more interested. He asked Nolan whether he had ever worked on the Orion Corridor project. The room went completely still. Nolan stopped breathing for a second. That name hadn't been spoken around him in 15 years. Darius leaned forward. He asked whether Nolan Pierce was the same Nolan Pierce who had once prevented the collapse of a multinational shipping network during the Port Meridian crisis. Nolan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Darius already knew. The billionaire slowly stood. He walked around the conference table and looked at Nolan with something approaching disbelief. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "Does your CEO know who you are?" Nolan lowered his eyes. He said that his CEO knew he was a logistics coordinator. Darius shook his head. He said she clearly didn't know anything important. Nolan asked what he meant. Darius explained that 15 years earlier, Nolan had been one of the youngest strategic operations specialists he had ever encountered. He had saved companies millions during multiple international crises. He had once been considered a future executive leader. Then he disappeared. Darius had assumed Nolan had left the industry permanently. He had never imagined the quiet coordinator sitting across from him was the same man. The other executives began whispering. Nolan remained silent. He told Darius that the person he used to be wasn't important anymore. Darius disagreed. He said it was important because Nolan had not lost his ability. He had simply chosen to use it for something else. Then Nolan received a phone notification. It was a photograph from Maisie. She had drawn a picture of the two of them standing beside a tall building. Underneath it she had written, "My dad can do anything." Nolan stared at the screen. His eyes became wet. He quickly put the phone away. Darius noticed. He asked if everything was okay. Nolan said his daughter was waiting for him at home. That answer changed the billionaire's expression. Darius asked why Nolan had accepted such a modest position if he was capable of so much more. Nolan explained that after losing his wife, he had realized his daughter needed a father more than a powerful executive. He had turned down opportunities because he didn't want Maisie growing up wondering whether her father would come home. Darius sat down again. He told Nolan that he understood. His own father had been wealthy but absent. Darius had spent his childhood surrounded by expensive things and emotionally empty rooms. He said he had spent his entire adult life building an empire partly because he was still trying to prove he was worthy of his father's approval. Then he looked at Nolan. He said that Nolan had achieved something far more difficult. He had chosen his child over his ambition. The meeting continued. But this time, Darius didn't treat Nolan like an employee. He treated him like the person who could actually solve the problem. Nolan discovered that the proposed partnership contained a major logistical flaw that could cost the investment group hundreds of millions of dollars. He calmly redesigned the distribution model, identified 3 hidden risks, and proposed a solution that would save both companies enormous amounts of money. The room was stunned. Darius finally understood that Nolan's intelligence had never disappeared. It had simply been hidden beneath years of ordinary fatherhood. The next morning, Nolan received an unexpected video call from Vivian. She was furious. She accused him of making unauthorized changes to the company's proposal. Nolan calmly explained that the changes were necessary. Vivian told him to follow instructions and stop trying to make himself important. Nolan didn't argue. He simply said he had completed the assignment. Then the call ended. 2 hours later, Vivian received a call from Darius Alcott. She entered the conference room expecting to discuss the contract. Instead, Darius placed Nolan's original resume on the table. He asked Vivian whether she had ever read it. She said yes. Darius told her she hadn't. He explained who Nolan really was. Vivian stared at the resume. Her expression changed. She realized the man she had treated as a replaceable employee had just saved the largest international deal her company had ever pursued. But Darius wasn't finished. He told Vivian that he would sign the partnership only if Nolan personally remained involved. Vivian asked why. Darius answered that he trusted the man who had solved the problem, not the executive who had tried to hide him. Nolan was offered a senior leadership position, but he didn't immediately accept. Instead, he asked whether the position would require him to travel constantly. Darius smiled. He told Nolan that the position could be structured around his responsibilities as a father. Nolan was stunned. Nobody had ever offered him success without demanding that he sacrifice his daughter for it.